हमारी स्पिरिट से बढ़कर के दुनिया में कोई फोर्स नहीं होता। उत्साह परम बलम।
Prarambh, Utsaha Param Balam. Taking inspiration from Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision. Let us ignite the next major movement for startups. Let's celebrate the ideas and the excitement. Let's exchange awareness and knowledge. Let's expand the horizons. Let's establish accolades. Let's embrace. Let us initiate. Prarambh, Utsaha, Param Balam. Startup India International Summit.
A very good evening to everybody, and welcome to this session on enabling market access for startups. On behalf of Team Prarambh, I'm very delighted and fortunate to be hosting this crucial session on enabling market access for startup. In recent years, we've witnessed that startups have transformed consumer behavior and industry standards with innovation. They've in fact managed to break the glass ceiling and introduce the world to a new age, a new era of technological innovations. And these have been across sectors like artificial intelligence, e-commerce, health tech, ed tech, to name a few. Very recently carried out NASSCOM's India Startup Tech Landscape, the report says that the Indian startup ecosystem added 12 unicorns in 2020, which has been the most in a single calendar year. And we're expecting India to have 50 plus unicorns by the end of 2021. What does this tell us? The booming startup culture across the globe is gaining traction in multifolds. In fact, only the US ecosystem has added more unicorns than India in 2020. So globally, there is absolutely no doubt that the new era of innovation is being driven. The groundbreaking innovations are being pioneered by the startups. One of the challenges when such, but they rarely have the capability to tap into newer markets. But it's like a chicken and egg problem because the consumers, they expect reliability through market presence and brand endorsements, which mean quite a lot. So how do we solve this chicken and egg problem? I think which is why today's session is the most important, because it really needs to address how do we provide the gateway for these startups. I recollect the very famous saying that goes that instead of giving people fishes to eat, we rather teach them how to fish. And that's where it's important to give the opportunity for these startups and give them the markets to play with. It is extremely critical for the ecosystem to come together in such a scenario. The power of collaboration is extremely key. I can't stress this further, given the kind of scenario that we are in today. If we look at the investing partners, they are going a long way infusing funds. It's no doubt that India's investment arm, the Invest India, has been voted the top by the UNCTAD. On the other hand, we have the corporates who are pitching in, providing platforms for the startups to showcase, providing them the growth trajectory for them to scale into bigger and newer markets. And then we have the governments, which are playing a crucial role from a policy standpoint, from a provisioning standpoint for deploying all these startup innovations in real world. The call for Atmanirbhar, build local, go global, it could not have come at a better time. the timing is precise. It is ripe enough for the startups which are maturing. And if we look at it from a startup's point of view, for them, it is very key that they capture the local market and then tap into existing networks and markets to understand, to beta test, to improvise their products and solutions before they scale up. Which is why the incubators, accelerators, the support system goes a long way in growing their trajectory in a very steep curve. The year 2020 has been a total game changer, especially for the startup ecosystem. We've witnessed a huge disruptive drift in how the consumer behavior has been. And the business strategies, they've really seen demands like never before. So they've all gone in for a total toss, but for the good. COVID-19 has totally changed the world of digital transformation, and we're starting to experience the new reality of what digital transformation has got to offer to us. While on one side, we do hear a lot of stories of challenges in startups shutting shop, but on the other side, the greener side is that these are challenges that would challenge these startups to go to the brink, to innovate, to experiment with minimum and come out with maximum outcomes. Do more with less. So that's been the mantra. And lengthening the runway has been extremely key for most of these startups that we've been working with. I re-emphasize that there has been a never before prevalent time than now. There has never been a greater urgency than now for the startups to innovate, get into the markets. The international community coming along and working with the startups, this is the right time to talk about this, make their mark bigger and better. Today, I'm very glad, proud, and privileged to represent Cisco Launchpad as a representative from India and as a corporate representative. So I run the Cisco Launchpad Startup Accelerator, where we work with deep tech startups, acting as a router for these startups and helping them grow in the areas of enterprise technologies, in the areas of IoT and digitization, as well as futuristic technologies coming on from research labs, coming on from cutting edge research. And we help them try to see how we can act as a fulcrum using technology as the enabler. How do we touch the lives of millions? How do we enable the lives for millions of people out there and help them to make a change to themselves through the power of technology? So we have been working with startups at Cisco Launchpad. We've been helping accelerating them, mainly from a technology standpoint, from a market access standpoint, giving them access to the international markets as well. And the key part of our engagement with startups has been the power of engagements and collaborations with them. So today I have with me an elite panel of distinguished people from different countries joining us today. And these are people who are established, who are renowned in their fields, have done quite a lot significantly for the startup ecosystem, and would like to share with you their point of view on how they are enabling market access for startups. May I welcome Dr. Rajiv Kantpal, the Chief Financial Officer of the Government e-Marketplace India, to share your introduction, please, sir.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here as part of this esteemed panel. I am Rajiv Kantpal. I am presently working as the Chief Finance Officer at GEM. GEM is a Section 8 company of the Government of India, established in August 2016, and it provides a digital procurement platform from where all government buyers, state government buyers, central government buyers, autonomous bodies can completely in a digital way buy their products and services. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am now privileged to welcome Mr. Sanath Panavanange from the Arthur Clarke Institute of Modern Technologies, Sri Lanka. Sir, can we have your introduction, please?
Well, good afternoon to all of you, and I'm glad to be here. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and I must also say that I must also thank the Commercial and Economic Affairs section of the High Commission of India here in Colombo for inviting me and asking me to join this session. Well, I function as the Director General and CEO of the Arthur C. Clarke Institute for Modern Technologies, which is basically a public research institute specialized in modern technologies. Our mandate is actually to accelerate the introduction of modern technologies into Sri Lanka, which includes electronics, telecommunication, IT, robotics, and very specially space technology. In the area of space technology, we actually have a very special role. So we are working as the de facto space agency of the country, or rather the space agency in the making. Our association with the area of innovation and supporting innovation ecosystem in the country is in the form of providing technical support to basically technology-driven innovators to get their products tested. And also we provide some incubation support as well, and help them to get their patents and get their standards checked, get their products and sometimes innovative services checked against the standards of the country. And that's basically where our help to the technology-driven innovations is coming in. I hope that's good enough. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanath. We will talk more. I would like to welcome Mr. Ugyen Jamsho, who is the founder of I'm Entrepreneur from Bhutan.
Kuzampula and hello to everyone. I'm Ugyen Chota Jamso, and I'm the founder of an event called I'm an Entrepreneur. First of all, I would like to thank the chairperson and the team behind for this wonderful opportunity. Well, I'm an Entrepreneur is a startup event management firm. We do an annual event called I'm an Entrepreneur with a motto to create awareness and promote entrepreneurship as a career path for the unreached youths of Bhutan by working closely with the existing entrepreneurs of our country. Through our social media platform, we try to share, inspire, and motivate youth as well as ourselves from the stories of the struggles and challenges and the success of the existing entrepreneur, as we believe that story resonates and connects to bring our dreams into reality. And also we share the available informations from the government, agencies, and other entrepreneur supporting organizations to uplift entrepreneurship and startups in our country. Our first I'm an Entrepreneur event was held on December 2019 with almost 200 plus participants from the startup communities, entrepreneurs, and other members from the government. And currently we are on hold due to the pandemic, and we are hoping by this year, 2021, to cater our service and bring that platform live to the youths and entrepreneurs of our country. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ugyen. The world needs a lot more of such inspiration, and no doubt the media is playing a huge role. Thank you. We hope to learn more from you. May I next welcome Mr. Rangsan Prampasit from QQ, Thailand.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this interesting session. I'm Rangsan Prampasit from QQ, Thailand. QQ start the business from a queuing solution. We try to solve the problem about time wasting in crowded places. So we start with a restaurant market and expand to other market like a telco, government services, hospitals, and after that we expand our service to other countries like Malaysia, and Taiwan as well. After COVID-19 pandemic, we are working with the government to protect our people from the spreading of the virus. So today we have a solution that are implemented to many places to protect our people on the place about to keep social distancing and control the carrying capacity on that places. So this situation is very harmful. Hope everyone will be safe. Thank you.
The queues have been the biggest concerns for governments worldwide, especially after pandemic. And very glad that you've taken this up and helping address social safety for people around the world. Thank you, Mr. Rangsun. Last but not the least, I would like to welcome Mr. Bijan Islam, who's the CEO and founder of Light Castle Partners, joining us from Bangladesh.
Thank you for welcoming me, and I'm very excited to be part of this very, very distinguished panel. So a warm afternoon to all of you. I represent Light Castle from Bangladesh. We are a consulting firm based out of there for the last 7 years. We work a lot on the entrepreneurship ecosystem development. We have supported more than 30 plus accelerator programs so far. In 2020, we helped build capacity of a lot of existing accelerators in the market, also help bring global accelerators like the Global Entrepreneurship Network, Founder Institute into Bangladesh as well. Apart from that, we also do be local partner to multiple funds based all over the world. So right now we act as a local partner to a $5 million Swiss fund, as well as we are due diligence partner to Startup Bangladesh Limited, which is a $60 million VC fund backed by the ICT Ministry at Ms. Sina Jabin as the managing director. I'm very excited to take part in this session and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. A warm welcome again to all my co-panelists today. Let's start with Dr. Rajiv. Dr. Rajiv, as the CFO of the most crucial gateway for startups, which is the GEM, the government e-marketplace, you have facilitated procurement from government for very many startups. Can you tell us a little bit about how this whole thing of government acting as a consumer for startups pans out, and how do you enable this government market access for young startups? What are the challenges involved in this?
See, if we look at the policies which the government has recently made in order to strengthen the startup ecosystem in the country, two schemes stand out. One is the Startup India program, of course, which is a kind of a flagship initiative of the government, which provides, among other things, for incubation facilities, funding infrastructure, say the market access, and also easing public procurement norms for startups. Apart from this, there is another scheme, which is the government e-marketplace, which was conceived in August 2016, which had at its objective establishment of an online procurement platform, which would fundamentally transform the public procurement scenario of the country. So over the past 4 years that GEM has been working, we have done a business, a gross merchandise value of about 77,000 crores on the portal. And that itself is a testimony to the kind of response the government e-marketplace has received from the buyers and from the sellers. Coming to your question regarding what are the initiatives that GEM has taken for specifically for startups. You see, enabling startups for procurement by government agencies is something that is part of the core mandate of GEM. One of the core ethics that we have at GEM is inclusivity. And by inclusivity, I mean trying to engage with the niche seller segments, like say the startups, the MSEs, the women entrepreneurs, the Divyangjan entrepreneurs, and trying to ensure that they also get directly connected with government buyers so that their products and services can be taken up by the government buyers. So in this context, we have, in respect of startups, we have the Startup Runway, which is a kind of a microsite within government e-marketplace, and which provides for startups to list their services there, which then can be directly bought by various government agencies. As on the portal today, we have something like 8,000 startups which have done a business of more than 2,000 crore. I think 2,300 crores business has been done by startups alone on the portal. So the figures have been very, very, very overwhelming, very appreciative. The key challenge when we talk about startups and enabling them for public procurement is that the typical marketplace, the government buying is governed by technical parameters today. It is like a comparative framework. So when a government agency buys, essentially it compares products, and startups being innovative, unique products may not really be amenable to such a comparison. And this was what we kept in mind when GEM came up with the startup runway. So it is an approach away from the typical TP, technical parameter based approach of the marketplace, wherein startups can themselves list their services at any kind of category that they feel they are relevant, and then they can directly, we help them, we map them to various government buyers which can be, say, relevant to them. And that's how we have tried to enable startups doing business with the government.
That was quite enlightening. In fact, I have worked with a couple of startups at Cisco Launchpad that have had a very pleasant experience onboarding themselves on the e-portal and having access to a lot of governmental projects. So thank you, sir. A lot more information for us today on this. Mr. Bijan, as an investor, I'm sure you definitely like to open international doors for startups and to expose their innovation to the external ecosystem. But what kind of public policy support do you think is required, and what is the Bangladesh government doing for such a requirement from the startups?
Thank you. Thank you for that very important query. I think it's relevant to everyone in the ecosystem. I think if I think a bit, I think there will be kind of like three broad pillars that needs to come together to develop the ecosystem and provide broader access to market for the startups. The first piece of the puzzle is definitely solving the access to funding problem, because even though there are investors in the ecosystem, they possibly come in a bit later. At the initial early stage, you need a lot of funding, and those kind of funding is often difficult to get by. The traditional funding ecosystem that's there is, with a lot of banks and BFIs is not the right kind of funding for startups. So I think at an early stage, figuring out this funding ecosystem is very important. And I think the government of Bangladesh has done a lot, especially with the Startup Bangladesh project. They did a lot of grants on their early days. And then now they have launched the $60 million venture capital fund. I think that those will go a long way in developing and catalyzing funds for the ecosystem. But I think things need to happen more. Give tax breaks for, say, angel investments, provide other facilities for investors who invest in the market. I think those kind of things can definitely propel the ecosystem a lot faster. I think the alternative investment rules was a big step that was taken in 2015. But I think making investors enticed with further incentives to invest in the ecosystem can definitely go a long way. The second piece of the puzzle, I think, establishing is the infrastructure pillar. And I'm very happy to even what's happening in India. In Bangladesh, a lot of things are happening. There are a lot of accelerators, incubators that are happening up, even from public universities. And again, the government has also invested in co-working spaces. There are more than 34 high-tech parks where startups have access to a lot of high-quality infrastructure at very cost-competitive pricing. So I think figuring out this infrastructure, making sure that those are accesses to both early stage and as the startups scale, having access to those infrastructure will definitely make a difference. And we need to continue to invest in this kind of infrastructures as well. And third piece I think is very important is, and I think Rajiv sir also mentioned this a bit, is figuring out this access to markets. So access to market is not just about international market, but also to access to local markets as well. Public procurement is a big space, and it's always difficult for startups to apply for providing public goods and services, but they can definitely go a long way by providing this at very cost-competitive prices. During the COVID-19, I think Startup Bangladesh Limited worked with the Ministry of Education in Bangladesh to ensure that startups are providing critical, essential education, blended learning products to the ministries. And those are more cost effective and the quality was much higher than other existing traditional procurement channels. And if the government can make G2G deals, especially discussions like this, where you have access to regional markets, have things like tax incentives, proper ways to channel markets. If those goes a lot longer, and I think a government in a position have the G2G links through embassies and different government ministries to push startup products not only in their own country but in the region as well. I think those would be again my three things: that work on the access to funding, work on access to infrastructure, and work on access to both the domestic and the international markets. Thank you.
You brought in very important points, Mr. Vijan. So I would just like to shift gears and ask a similar question to Mr. Sanath, that when we have existing markets, probably the adoption is easier. But given the Sri Lankan government and under his leadership is working on very forthcoming technologies, innovations hitherto unseen before. So what are some of the challenges that you're seeing for these startups here? Or what kind of market barriers for a place where there is no pre-existing market? How do you train them, sir?
Whether it is technology-driven startups and innovations or otherwise general startups in general, there's a range of barriers. So, if you like, bottlenecks that they are faced with. I would like to look at it in two different categories. One is, of course, the generic, systemic kind of bottlenecks that any startup or any innovator would be faced with, and the others would be product-specific ones. When it comes to those generic ones, of course, some of them could be related to access to incubation facilities, access to venture capital, access to funding, and then access to technical advice and technical facilities to get technical consultancy. And then also sometimes when it comes to micro-level innovators, startups which are coming up with micro-level enterprises to begin with, sometimes it could be even things like getting patents, getting their intellectual property registered. So I think we have quite a good ecosystem to support all these things. We have, as I said, my own agency, the Arthur C. Clarke Institute for Modern Technologies, as a technology public research institution specialized in technology. We are also carrying out this function of providing consultancy for product development. And when they come up with some initial product design, we give them support on how it can be improved and all that. So in addition to that, there are other agencies which are like, there's an agency called Sri Lanka Inventors Commission, which is basically supporting that kind of inventors. When they come up with an idea, they help them with getting their patents, they channel it to the intellectual property office, and then they help them get their patents. And also there's another fund called Sri Lanka Inventors Fund, which is actually used to provide some initial funding necessary for some of those initial activities. So those are some of the activities that take place. But when it comes to, as I said, so one of the fundamental questions is when it is a high-tech product or a product which is technically complex one, in most of the cases it involves standards. So sometimes the country might have a standard which is already published by the standards body of the country. Sometimes there may be situations where you have to check that against standards that have not been yet adopted by the country, but some international standards like the standard of some International Electrotechnology Commission or something like that. So when it comes to that kind of requirement, where a startup innovator is in need of that kind of intervention in terms of consultancy and also guidance to get that quality barrier, to get through that quality barrier, we at Arthur C. Clarke Institute, we help them. So these are some of the things that I would like to share with you.
Mr. Sanath, you spoke about this quality barrier, and I will kind of pose this to Mr. Ugyen and ask from an entrepreneur perspective. So, how are you breaking the quality barrier? So, how are you kind of gauging the right product design for your own products, and what are you seeing from a market access viewpoint? Are there any gaps? Are there any challenges as such?
Let me make it into a very sweet and short one. Let me break down this into 2 points. To measure the common gaps in market access and product design, I think number one is because of the payment gateway, and number two is to get feedbacks from our customer. And the right way to address these challenges is that if the government or the financial institutes can build a better payment system for both the local and international buyers and sellers, I think it will create a vast difference and a better opportunities for every entrepreneurs and startup to have a better and bigger market access. And I also think that it's very important for the entrepreneurs to get feedbacks from our consumers and the customers. Because be it a branded or a newly launched product, I think there is always going to be that missing functionalities and the features. And no product is going to be perfect. So therefore, I think it's always good to have feedbacks from the customer, because customers knows the real default in our product. And I think it will really help us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rugian. Mr. Rangsan, again, coming from an entrepreneur point of view, I'd like to know if you kind of resonate with Mr. Ugyen on, is this the right way? Are you seeing similar challenges at Thailand too? And what do you think should be the right kind of enabler coming in from the government or any other industry body for procurement, especially in the B2B space?
Yes, if talking about B2B space, the big challenge for every startup, if you are a newcomer, your products cannot haven't fit the market yet, and you are the development of the product. So every time that you approach to customers, everyone will ask you about reference size or who is your current customers. This is the biggest challenge for them. So how to get the first group of a customer? So it depends on your market. If depends on the size of B. If the big B, that means corporates, the big SME, you need to do one by one approaching. No choice. You need to talk one by one and try to convince them to use your product. If small B, you can find them from seminars or exhibition with a specific audience, target audience. But most of time, every time that you try to convince them, the trust is the most important things about considering. So in Thailand, some government agency try to action on this because of no trust at the first time. For sure, if you don't have the big connection with them, with the first target customer. So one government agency called DBA launched the campaign called Digital Provider. This campaign, they will pay for the service of a startup for those SME. So that means SME no need to investment on trying the product. But after they try on the POC period with the product, maybe half of a year or a year, after that, if a startup can prove that the product or service can solve the problem of those SME, the real customer will become the real customer by payment by pay of the product by themselves. But the biggest challenge is not a B2B, it is a G side, government side. The market of government is harder from B side for sure, because of government agencies. Part of department of government is very hard to make trust, and the procurement process is something that big barrier for startup as well. So another government agency called NIA launched another campaign that called government procurement project that inject the grant directly to startup to provide a service for government departments or government agencies to prove that the product can fit to the market, can fit to the government market, to fit to the problem that a government agency want to solve. So this is the kind of thing. And after that, after proof that it can solve the problem, it will turn to be like a normal procurement process. But for the normal procurement process, maybe many competitor startup need to compete with a big corporate as well, or foreign startup, or many competitors. So another government agency called NSTDA launched another campaign that is a project that you can apply to be one of innovation provider list. That means it can cut off the process, shorten the process of procurement from government side as well. This is something that Thai government try to attack and mapping startup service with a B side and government side as well. Thank you.
So there are two main things that I am taking away from your points. So one is that it is very clear that the government is trying its best. The government across the nations are trying their best to procure and make the way for working with startups much easier. But the very loud and clear question is it sufficient to have only the government as the buyer? So Dr. Rajiv, this question is for you, especially in the light of some of the very recent Big Bang announcements about the Indian Army signing contracts with a startup for drone procurement. May not be up to this case specifically, but in general, do you think it is sufficient for a startup to have only the government as a buyer, or should they be looking at a hybrid approach?
No, obviously, for any startup or for any marketeer as such, one would like to keep as broad a canvas as possible, right? But the question is, really, do we have a choice at times as entrepreneurs? For example, there may be so many sectors like, say, urban waste management, defense, water conservation, irrigation, wherein overwhelmingly large number of buyers may be government. And in such cases, I believe it is platforms like GEM who connect you to government buyers that they become relevant for you as a strategy of marketing in case you are a startup. So to briefly answer your question, I believe one should, as far as possible, as a startup or as any product manager, of course, it is your strategy, it is your intention to keep your target audience as vast as possible. But that may not always be the case. For example, let me tell you some examples coming from GEM. So there have been so many startups who, based on the kind of products that they have, very unique, innovative products, which are only relevant to perhaps bodies which are in either government bodies or substantially financed by the government. For example, there is a startup, a beautiful product which has been developed by a startup called Gen Robotic Innovation. So it is a robotic device which can be lowered into sewers to remove accumulated waste. Now, let us think as to who would be the relevant buyers in this case. Most of them would be urban bodies, municipal management bodies, urban bodies, and at least in the context of our country, you would find that they are essentially of either government bodies or substantially financed by the government. Same holds for sectors like clean tech, water conservation. So what the experience has been that government buyers are taking in a large way, looking at interested at startups, and startups are now beginning. We can see a trend where startups are exclusively developing products which are relevant to government buyers. And it is here that I think GEM, as a government procurement platform, has a special role to perform for towards startups who are developing, creating such products.
So, sir, I have no doubt that government is kind of opening up a plethora of opportunities. But entrepreneurs like Mr. Ugin, you can't say a no when such a golden opportunity knocks your door. So how do you leverage such an opportunity? What do you do as a team, as an entrepreneurial team? What are some of the initiatives that you are taking from your end to leverage such initiatives? Are there any examples from Bhutan also that you would like to quote for us?
Talking about the challenges and impacts and opportunities on how startups can leverage. I think there are numerous ways to leverage the startups, but I'll just highlight a few points. See, the concept of buying goods and services online in my society, it's very new compared to the businesses that we have been doing decades ago. So therefore, the right way for the startups to thrive in their business during the pandemic and after the pandemic is to create advocacy and awareness for the customers about the online platforms they have created. And it is also important for the startups like us to create a very authentic online services to buy the goods and services. Since every one of us knows that it is the most safer, faster and convenient one to the models or to the ways on businesses that we have been doing decades ago, and taking the steps to steps to save our businesses, considering both temporary and long-term measure. I think it's very important for every startup to create a new business models, like selling their goods and services online and delivering goods and services door to door for our customers' needs. Thank you. Thank you.
So pivoting is, I understand, the need of the hour. You will have to kind of respond to the market reactions, situations. Mr. Sanath, you've been working very closely with a lot of startups and mentoring them too. So when you work with them, what do you tell them about this continuously evolving markets? And there is a huge shift in how the stakeholders are looking at what they needed pre-COVID times versus the new post-pandemic times. So how are you helping them identify the right timing for fine-tuning their market access plan?
In fact, to begin with, let me say that our involvement has been basically a technology input in most of the cases. But I can certainly answer your question. It's not only a startup. Any organization will have to keep a constant watch of the changing market environment. So that's one of the fundamentals of marketing, because the market environment is fundamentally changing all the time, very dynamic. So anybody who wants to be in business or who wants to start up a business will have to be in continuous watch. So having said that, one of the things, given the kind of inventions, given the kind of startups that we come across, so something that we see most of the time is that as their orientation is fundamentally technical, they try to work in what we call in marketing terms, what is called product orientation, fundamentally having an orientation towards developing the product technically to add more features, to come up with more advanced technology features. And sometimes when you actually look at how the product is being used by the user in the context of use of the product, sometimes some of these, these very attractive technological features that you keep on adding may not add value that would commensurate with the effort that you are making. So one of the fundamental things that I see that most of these tech innovators will have to look at is how the product is actually being used in the context, in the actual context where that is being used. So they have to look at the user behavior in the actual context of use of the product. So this is a very vital thing. This would be one of the most important things, but then generally, I mean, other than that specific thing that is applicable to most of those technology-driven innovations, I would say they will have to keep a watch on the general market situation all the time. So coming to this specific period, of course, this is a very good time for them to strategize because this changing environment has given them the breathing space for them to strategize very well as to how they could pitch this once this situation changes a little bit, or there are certain things that we could do within this period itself. As you very rightly pointed out, I mean, this has brought a new context, a new normal. There are a lot of opportunities that we can exploit from that as well.
So user-driven tech innovation. So that is my biggest takeaway from what you just mentioned, sir. And I definitely feel that this is driving the era of innovation that we live in. And the top two buzzwords as we see today are, the first one is startups, second one is unicorn, and the third most jazzy one is cross-border. So this question is to Mr. Bijan. What do you suggest should be the right time for a startup to cross the borders and go beyond and deploy their products? When would you advise a startup? When is the right time for them to go beyond their domestic markets and start proving their mettle outside?
Thank you. Very interesting question. But I think the answer would be depends not only on the industry, but the startup, how they're structured. This is some of the things that we need to think about. If it's a company which you want to build, whether out of India or of Bangladesh or Nepal or Bhutan or Sri Lanka, and you decide the globe is going to be your market. So from day one, it's a different kind of startup, right? So depending on the product and service, you decide that I'm going to sell it worldwide. Using there are different marketplaces to do it, but that's a different kind of journey. And then there are other journeys, especially for not 0 to 1, but 1 to N innovations, that things that have worked well in other markets, you try to do that in your own country. A good example can be, say, logistics and mobility, right? Uber has worked in other countries. Can there be variants of it in Asia? So you have in India, Ola, right? And then you have, say, in Bangladesh, you have companies like Patao. But again, trying to figure out if you are the second type of company, I think it's important to understand, have you got your processes right? Have you are in a position where you can scale in the domestic market? Your capital flows are right. You have gotten at least your contribution margins positive. For a startup to reach break even on that scale it will take a bit of time, but at least your costs are optimized. You have figured out how to grow, and then of course the other market that you target, you understand whether you understand the dissimilarities more than the similarities, because each market is different. What has worked in, say, India or Bangladesh might not work in Nepal. What has worked in Bhutan might not work in Sri Lanka. So we don't know. So figuring out what are the dissimilarities is also very important. So I think these are the two things to think about. One is that if you are to build a global product from the beginning, especially trying to sell a product and service to the world, that would be one strategy. You try to build a global company from day one. Obviously, target the largest markets. Depending on what kind of product you're selling, it might be in the West, might be in the US, might be the European market. But again, figuring out partnerships on those markets, figuring out strategies where the highest demand exists is part of that, parcel of that. And if it's the second type, 1 to N innovations, right? And then again, win in your domestic market to a certain extent before thinking about going to other markets, and definitely think about dissimilarities more than your similarities, because trust me, what I've seen over my experience, markets are more dissimilarities than they look. Thank you. Back to you.
Let me touch on the key point that you mentioned is the globe, our market. For an entrepreneur like Mr. Rangsan, based in Thailand, which is most known for their openness, social media usage, and their focus on MarTech, which is music, arts, and recreation tech, and the whole economy is now moving to digital. So, how are you as an entrepreneur finding your niche market, especially coming from a deep tech background? Are you going towards a niche market, or are you going to a generic market, domestic or global? What is your viewpoint?
From my point of view, actually we have no choice. We need to focus to niche market because of a generic market. Corporate already take it all and have no part of us to sharing something. But we need to do some disruptive technology or services to make a niche market at the beginning to the generic market at the end. So we need to start with niche market, but it must to be like make a huge niche market, because if you want to be we see fundable startup, you need to have a total addressable market around 1 billion USD. So it's quite big. So you cannot do just a small scale of business, small scale of niche market. So start from that area. You need to have like a big enough total addressable market, but you cannot start all market at the same time. You need to choose some market, small market in that big market. Maybe it's a location based, like a city, town first, and then expand it to other town, other city this way, or some segment like my own startup. We start from restaurant market first, then go to other market like this. But you need to keep the main value of your product, not just like have many feature with a many value of the service or product. Because of if you do that way, you may be nothing for anyone and downgrade of your branding as well. This is
Very true.
the key.
Very true. I know. I kind of
so
concur.
Win the first market, you move to next.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you, Mr. Rangsan. You start small, grow big from there. But on behalf of startups like yours and thousands of startups that are watching this today, this question is to Dr. Rajiv. What should be their pitch to you? How can they best portray their innovation to you? So if they were, what is like the ideal pitch that you would advise the startups to come up with?
So let me just reframe your question a bit. I think GEM has taken on this mantle of trying to pitch the startups to various government buyers. So we are in them for the pitch. We are with them for the pitch. So what we have been at, there is no sure solution to how we try to connect a startup with various government buyers. But how we have been trying to do it is as follows. So we have of late started a digital process wherein once a startup registers on a startup runway, we try to understand, in order to be able to understand the product, we ask a few set of questions from the startup, which would be typically like as to which are the main agencies of the government you think will find value in your product. We let them take a few options, and subsequently we take it from there, and we try to send mailers. We try to connect the buyers, the such agencies, with the startups. So that is one way as to how we are trying to solve this conundrum, because Obviously, with about 8,000 startups there, sometimes government buyers also are in a kind of a quandary as to which would be the relevant product to them. And they may not always appreciate the uniqueness of a product. So this is one. Fortunately, a lot of work on this behalf is also being done by Startup India, which is kind of a complementary work by organizing various kind of challenges, hackathons. What is happening is even the government buyers themselves are discovering as to what kind of value additions startups, particular startups to a sector, can bring about in their existing processes. So these are 2 3 strategies which we have been following to help startups pitch to various government buyers. We have a completely dedicated vertical within GEM which tries to understand a product before we register and onboard the product on the startup runway, and then we try to find meaning as to which will be the relevant buyers who would be interested, and then we try to connect with such buyers. So this is there is no sure short way of how to achieve this, but one thing that is very heartening to notice that government buying from startups has increased tremendously, and the rules that have been eased for startups, for example, today startups, when they bid for public projects, they're not required to submit any earnest money deposit or to show any prior experience.
That's splendid in terms of the ease that you have kind of brought in. So if I kind of understand, this is more of a journey rather than a destination, if we portray it, if we look at it. One wildcard question that I would like to ask all of you, just put on the hat of a supreme policymaker of the nation. And if you were to make just one policy that would ease market access for startup, what would that one policy be? In no particular order. You can go first, Dr. Rajiv.
Well, this is something which is I'm very passionate about. And if we have actually been advocating this from GEM, that this typical kind of comparative framework which today governs a public procurement, this has to be somewhere modified, or a fundamentally new way has to be taken if we are to encourage startups in public procurement, because the kind of unique, innovative solutions that startups by definition provide, they are inherently at a disadvantage when we ask them to make cost comparisons with similar conventional products. That's just not, I believe, not fair. So this is something that we have been trying to advocate.
Dr. Sanath, any closing, one-liner on what policy that you would like to infuse into the system?
Well, in Sri Lanka's case, I would very briefly say it is a better incubation system. So that's a part of the ecosystem which is highly necessary.
Better incubation system. How about you, Mr. Ugyen? With Bhutan known for happiness, what is your point of view? What is that one policy?
I would still like to stick with that payment gateway system. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Rangsan, the chance is yours.
Yes, I love the policy of Dr. Rajiv. Public procurement is the one that I love to have as well for myself.
Mr. Bijon, would you like to differ? Is there a different policy you're willing to add on to this?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with all of the panelists, but I do want to add that we should all work, and there should be policies so that all of our ease of doing business index becomes less than 25. I think that is what's really going to help the startups in all these regional countries go to the next level. Thank you.
I can't agree with you more on this. Combining the passion of the entrepreneurs, combining the vision that they come up with, the value that they infuse into this ecosystem, infusing the ease of doing business is like the perfect recipe for unlocking infinite possibilities. So I just conclude by quoting a very famous quote of Swami Vivekananda. It's just that we have to arise, awake, and stop not till the goals are met. Thank you so much for being part of this wonderful panel. and hope to unlock many more opportunities for the startups across the globe. Especially coming from a corporate background, we are very happy to work with all partners across the ecosystem, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.